Some attributed his bitterness to failing health, but this statement jumped out at me. We could expect them to come over to us. It exposed Luther's view of the Jews and how the church was in a Gentile bubble. He believed the Jews had to join the Gentile church in order to receive salvation. Obviously, in his mind, the church had replaced the Jews as the focus of God's purposes. They were then fair game because they'd not come over to us. Once they'd been God's chosen nation, but now they no longer were. I realized that if this was also Calvin's view, it would explain how a Geneva free of Jews would have been most convenient to him, lest they debase his model city of God. This drove me to dig deeper. It soon became clear that Calvin had studied the history of Israel very thoroughly. However, judging by some of his quotes, he clearly differentiated their present significance from their previous one. When more polite, he wrote,
I have had much conversation with many Jews. I have never seen either a drop of piety or a grain of truth or ingenuousness. No, I have never seen common sense in any Jew.
When less polite, he wrote that the Jews,
rotten in unbending stiff-neckedness, deserves that they be oppressed unendingly without measure or end, and that they die in their misery without the pity of anyone.
So it appeared that Calvin was on the same page as Luther regarding the Jews who'd not come over to us. This he confirmed in his commentary on Romans chapter 11. Verse 26 says, and so all Israel shall be saved. Calvin's comment was that
the Israel of God is what Paul calls their church.
With Galatians 6 verse 16, which speaks of the Israel of God, he reinforced his position and said,
there are two classes who bear this name. A pretended Israel, which appears to be so in the sight of men, and the Israel of God.
For Calvin, it was a pretense that the Jews were still God's chosen nation. By this he implied that God had transferred all the covenants and promises to the church. Indeed, that it had become a new and improved version of Israel. This meant that, in Luther's latter words, since the Jews rejected Jesus,
the only things left for them are the curses found in the Bible, but none of the blessings.
It all pointed in one direction. The message that the church had replaced Israel was woven into the newly recovered gospel. As it was dramatically changing people's lives, and the Jews were seen as an accursed people, no one disputed it. Then, as it passed from one generation of the church to the next, the message became increasingly established as the truth. However, this was by no means a guarantee of truth. Luther and Calvin might have been deceived. Could this then be the great incompletion of the Reformation? And if so, where did it all start? Like tracing a leak from underground, I knew I had to get to its source. The more I dug, the deeper I realized it was buried in history. What I eventually unearthed was that the same position had been taken over 1,000 years earlier. Respected leaders of the 4th century church onwards, like Hilary, Bishop of Poitiers, had said,
I will not eat with the Jews. The Jews are a people who always persisted in iniquity and glorified wickedness.
Jerome, who was a prolific author and a powerful priest who was later made a saint, wrote that,
well, there could never be expiation for the Jews, you see. God has always hated them. They are assassins of Christ. Christians should always hate the Jews.
Indeed, Bishop John Chrysostom, who was greatly respected as a theologian, published 8 sermons expressing intense hatred toward the Jews, saying,
Because God hates the Jews, 'tis the duty of Christians to hate them. A synagogue is worse than a brothel, is the den of scoundrels and repair of wild beasts.
A mob, led by Bishop Ambrose of Milan that included many monks, destroyed the synagogue at Callinicum. In order to rebuild the synagogue at his own expense, he angrily retorted,
I declare, I have set the fire to the synagogue. So, there would be no place where Christ be rejected.
Augustine of Hippo, a bishop known as one of the greatest Christian thinkers of all time, said,
The Jews were the sons of God, but now they are the sons of Satan. The true image of the Hebrews is Judas Iscariot, who sells the Lord for silver. The Jews will never understand the scriptures and forever bear the guilt for the death of Christ.
Augustine's writings were highly influential in the development of Western Christianity.